It was just another slow morning at the edge of a quiet town. The sun had already made its way up, stretching light across the streets. Most people had already gone to work or school, and the air was calm, almost lazy. The little diner on the corner, Sally's Country Kitchen, had a few regulars sipping coffee, reading newspapers, or chatting quietly. At about 10:30 a.m., a man pulled into the diner's parking lot in an old but well-kept pickup truck. He stepped out slowly, wearing a gray hoodie, black sweatpants, and simple sneakers. He wasn't in a rush. His walk was steady, heavy, but calm. People might have looked twice, not because they knew him, but because of his size. He was big, strong-looking, with a presence that filled space. His skin was dark and his face calm, but not unfriendly. He walked in quietly and gave a small nod to the woman behind the counter. She nodded back, a little smile on her face. Her name was Carol, and she'd worked the morning shift for over a decade. She didn't know his name, but he'd come in a few times before, always polite, always alone. He found a booth near the back, slid into the seat with a little grunt, and took a deep breath. It had been a long drive. He looked out the window for a moment as if watching something far away, then picked up the menu. He didn't really need it, he already knew what he wanted. Eggs, bacon, hash browns, and a tall glass of orange juice. Carol came over with a notepad. "Morning, hun," she said kindly. "Morning," he replied, his voice deep but soft. "Your usual." He gave a small nod. "Yes, ma'am," she smiled again. "Be right out." As she walked away, he leaned back in the booth. He looked tired, like a man who had carried more weight in life than just the kind people saw. Still, there was peace in his eyes. He wasn't looking for attention. He just wanted a meal and some quiet. 10 minutes later, the bell above the door jingled sharply. 4 young men walked in, laughing loudly, pushing each other around like boys who never quite grew up. They were all wearing matching black jackets with a strange patch sewn onto the sleeves, something that looked like a flag with a symbol over it. One of them had a bald head and sunglasses, even though they were indoors. Another had a thick chain around his neck. They were loud from the second they walked in, and the energy in the diner changed. The regulars looked up, then back down. Carol gave them a quick, forced smile and pointed them to an open table across the room. The man in the hoodie didn't react. He kept his eyes on the window and waited for his food. But that didn't stop the new group from noticing him. "Damn," one of them said, a little too loudly. "That booth holding up all right?" The others laughed. The man didn't turn. He didn't even blink. Just stayed still, as if the comment hadn't been said at all. That didn't sit well with them. "I said," the first man repeated. "You good, big guy? You sure that booth ain't about to snap?" More laughter. Carol looked over nervously, unsure whether to step in. One of the older regulars near the counter frowned and sipped his coffee, but said nothing. Still, the man in the hoodie didn't say a word. He just sat, calm as ever. The silence seemed to annoy the group even more. "Hey, maybe he didn't hear you," another one said. "You think he's slow or something?" This time the man turned his head just slightly. He didn't say a word. His eyes met theirs for a split second, calm, still, almost bored. And then he looked away. That one look? It said a lot. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was more like he had seen this kind of behavior before, and it didn't impress him. The food came a minute later. Carol placed the plate in front of him carefully. "Anything else you need?" she asked gently, as if trying to show a little extra kindness. "No, thank you," he said. She gave a nervous glance back at the loud table as she walked away. The man picked up his fork and started eating slowly, enjoying each bite. At the other table, the men were still chuckling to themselves. "Guy's just sitting there like a statue," one of them muttered. "He probably eats statues for breakfast," another joked. Then, one of them, taller, younger, with too much energy, stood up suddenly. "I'm gonna go say hi," the others smirked. Carol saw him stand and quickly moved behind the counter, pretending to clean something, but her eyes followed him. The man walked casually toward the booth and stopped right at the edge of the table. "Hey there," he said. "You're awfully quiet." The man didn't look up. "You ignoring me?" the guy asked. Still no answer. He smiled to himself, looked around, then leaned forward and bumped the edge of the table with his hip. The water glass rattled. A few drops splashed onto the table. "My bad," the man said with fake surprise. Didn't mean to do that. The man finally looked up. Not with anger. Not with fear, just steady eyes, calm and sharp. "No problem," he said quietly. His voice was deeper than the young man expected. There was something about the way he said those two words, controlled, firm. The younger man hesitated. He opened his mouth to speak again, but something about those eyes stopped him. For a second, nobody moved. Then the young man chuckled awkwardly. "All right then," he said, and turned back to his table. When he sat down, one of his friends leaned in. "What did he say?" "Nothing really," the man muttered. "Just whatever." The group went quiet for a moment. The energy had changed a little. Meanwhile, the man in the hoodie kept eating, peaceful as ever. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees. Inside, time passed slowly. A few more customers came and went. A mother with a toddler, a delivery guy picking up a to-go order. Life carried on, but something hung in the air, an uneasiness. A tension, not loud but thick like humidity before a storm. Carol noticed the man was nearly done with his food. She brought him the check without being asked. "Take your time, sugar," she said gently. He nodded. "Appreciate it." As she walked away, she felt that odd pull again. Like she should say more, like she should step in somehow. But what would she say? What could she say? She glanced at the loud table again. They weren't laughing anymore. Just watching. The man finished his last bite and wiped his mouth with a napkin. Then slowly he stood. He pulled out his wallet, left cash on the table with a tip, and turned toward the door. As he passed the other table, one of the men muttered under his breath. "Big man thinks he's better than everyone." Another snorted. Probably just another lazy freeloader. The man paused for just half a second. He didn't look at them. Didn't turn. Just took a breath and walked out. The door closed behind him, the bell jingling softly. Carol let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. One of the older customers at the counter shook his head. "Some people got no sense," he muttered. Out in the parking lot, the man opened the door to his truck, climbed in, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. He wasn't mad. He wasn't surprised. He had lived a life that most people couldn't imagine. He'd seen things, done things, faced things far scarier than some loud boys in a diner. They had no idea who he was, no idea where he'd been, no idea what he was capable of. And to be honest, he liked it that way. Because strength doesn't always show up as shouting or swinging fists. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like patience. And sometimes the quietest man in the room is the one who's already won. The truck sat in the parking lot for a few more minutes after the man climbed in. He didn't turn the key right away. His hands rested on the steering wheel, eyes staring ahead but not really looking at anything in particular. There was no anger on his face. Just thought. Inside the diner, the four men were still at their table, though their laughter had died down. The youngest one tapped his fingers on the table, restless. The one with the chain around his neck leaned back, chewing gum, looking toward the window. "You see the way he looked at me?" one of them said finally. "Yeah," the bald guy replied, like he wasn't scared. "Like he didn't care. That's what got me," said the other. "He just sat there like he had all the time in the world. Didn't even blink. They didn't know what to make of it." Usually when they acted that way around someone, the reaction was easy to read. Fear, anger, or at least discomfort. But this man had stayed still, quiet, controlled. That silence unsettled them more than shouting would have. The truth was, none of them had real plans that day. They weren't from the town. They'd driven in from about 40 miles away, just killing time, looking for something to do. This diner had been a random stop, but now something about that man stuck with them. They didn't want to admit it, but they couldn't shake it. "He's not from around here," the younger one said, glancing outside. "Trucks got out-of-town plates. You think he's one of those activist types?" someone muttered. "No," the bald one said. "He ain't the protesting type." "Then what?" There was a pause. "Military, maybe?" the guy with the chain guessed. They laughed, but the idea hung in the air longer than expected. Outside, the man finally turned the key. The engine started quietly. He pulled out of the lot slowly and turned left, heading back down the 2-lane road. But he wasn't going far. There was a small auto shop a few blocks away. He had an appointment there, oil change, tire rotation. The trip to the diner was just something to fill time before that. The shop owner greeted him with a handshake. recognizing the face from a few past visits. He handed over his keys and sat in the small waiting area. There was a pot of coffee, an old vending machine, and a TV playing a morning news show with low volume. The man didn't watch it. He just sat back, arms folded, resting his eyes. This was the only quiet time he had in the week. He spent most of his days driving, delivery work, sometimes long hauls across the state. It was decent money, and more importantly, it kept him moving. That's how he liked it. Moving, quiet, focused. Back at the diner, the four men finished their meal. They paid in cash, leaving coins on the table. As they walked out, their mood was different from when they walked in. Less loud, more watchful. One of them glanced up and down the street. "Truck's gone. Wonder where he went," the younger one said, pulling his jacket tighter. "You really want to know?" The bald one asked. "You trying to get into something?" "I'm just saying," he replied. "You don't walk into a place like that and act like you own it. Especially looking like that." "Looking like what?" another asked. "You know what I mean?" Nobody said anything for a second. They all did know what he meant. Then someone suggested, "Let's just drive around. See what's around here." They got into their SUV, started the engine, and rolled slowly down the road. The windows were cracked. The music low. For a group that usually brought noise wherever they went, they were oddly quiet now. It didn't take long before they spotted the same truck parked outside the auto shop. The man was inside, sitting on a plastic chair, his hands in his lap, eyes half closed. "There he is. Told you. You really want to mess with him?" The youngest one was the first to speak again. "What's the worst that could happen?" The bald guy shook his head. "That's what people say right before things go sideways." They parked across the street. Just watched for a minute. The shop owner came out to talk to the man, pointing at the truck, maybe explaining something about the work. The man nodded, stood up, walked outside, stretched a bit. Even from a distance, his posture was solid. The kind of posture that didn't come from lifting weights, but from years of discipline, years of training. The way he moved, controlled, deliberate, made it clear he was used to being aware of his surroundings. "All right," said one of the men. "Maybe we were wrong. Let's just go." But the younger one had already stepped out of the SUV. "Hey," one of the others called. "Where are you going?" He didn't answer. Just walked across the street, hands in his pockets. The man at the shop turned as the kid approached. His face didn't change. No surprise. No concern. Just calm observation. "Hey," the kid said. "Can I talk to you for a second?" The man gave a small nod. "Talk. Back at the diner?" "That was just messing around. You cool?" The man looked at him for a long second, then gave a small nod again. "All right," the kid said, backing up a little. "Just wanted to clear that up." The man didn't say anything else. The shop owner stood nearby, watching. He could tell something was off, but didn't speak up. The kid turned and walked back to the SUV. "See?" he said. Handled. But inside he wasn't sure. Something about the man's stillness made him feel like he hadn't handled anything at all. The man watched the SUV drive off. Then he turned back to the shop owner. "You ever have problems with people like that around here?" he asked. The shop owner shrugged. "Not usually, but they pop up now and then. Most of them are all talk." The man nodded again. "That's the thing. Sometimes talk's just the first part." The owner gave a cautious smile. "You seem like someone who knows how to handle it if it isn't." The man didn't answer. He didn't need to. By the time the truck was ready and he was back on the road, the SUV was nowhere to be seen. But the feeling stuck with him, the sense that something wasn't finished. Not fear, just awareness. He'd learned a long time ago that trouble doesn't always shout when it's coming. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it circles. And sometimes it comes from the people who think they're in control, until they realize they're not. Later that day, he pulled into a rest stop off the highway, grabbed a coffee, and sat at one of the picnic tables outside. His phone buzzed, just a message from someone checking in. He replied with a quick, "All good." Rolling through. He didn't mention the diner, didn't mention the four men. That wasn't unusual. He didn't talk much about those kinds of moments anymore. Not because they didn't matter, but because they happened too often, and because he'd learned not to give them more energy than they deserved. But still, the diner stayed on his mind, not because of what was said, not even because of what could have happened. But because those four men didn't even realize how close they'd come to a lesson they weren't ready for. Lesson in what real strength looks like. It doesn't shout. It doesn't brag. It doesn't push first. It waits. It watches. And it only steps forward when it has to. He finished his coffee, stretched his back, and headed toward the truck again. The sun was starting to dip low. Another long road ahead. Another town. Another day. But something told him he hadn't seen the last of those four. And the next time, they might not walk away so easy. The sun was starting to set as the man drove down the open highway. The sky was filled with orange and pink, the kind of colors that made even the busiest mind slow down a little. He had a long ride ahead of him, but he didn't mind. The hum of the engine, the smooth roll of tires on pavement. Those were the sounds that kept him steady. He had a delivery to make a few towns over. Nothing urgent, just supplies for a small hardware store. It paid just enough and kept his schedule full, which was exactly how he liked it. He didn't talk much about his past, not to strangers, not even to people he'd known for years. But when he looked in the rearview mirror and saw the road behind him, sometimes his thoughts drifted there anyway. He had been through things that taught him patience, things that taught him how to breathe through frustration, how to stay calm when others lost control. He wasn't perfect, but he had learned. And lately, more and more, he had needed to lean on those lessons, especially now. Back at the diner, he had stayed calm, because that's what experience had taught him to do. But he had felt something under the surface that day, something uneasy, not fear. Just that quiet inner bell that rang when you knew something wasn't finished, and sure enough, it wasn't. About halfway through his drive, his phone buzzed with a call. He checked the screen. It was the shop owner from earlier that day. He answered, holding the phone on speaker. "Hey, everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," came the reply. "Truck still running good?" "Smooth as ever." There was a pause on the line. "Thought I should tell you something," the shop owner said. "All right. Those guys from the diner? They came back, when? About an hour after you left. Parked outside for a bit, then came in asking if you were still around. Didn't cause trouble, but something about the way they were acting didn't sit right with me." The man was quiet for a moment. "You think they're looking for something?" he asked. "I don't know," the shop owner replied, "but it felt like they were trying to figure out who you were, where you were going." The man nodded slowly, even though no one could see it. "Appreciate the heads up," he said. "No problem. Just watch yourself." He ended the call and set the phone down beside him. His eyes stayed forward, but now they were sharper, more alert. He wasn't worried, but he was aware. That was enough. He made the delivery without any issue and found a small motel nearby. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and quiet. He checked in, got his key, and settled in for the night with a hot shower and a sandwich from the vending machine. Later, he sat on the edge of the bed, flipping channels on the small TV, but not really watching. His mind kept going back to those four men. The way they moved, the way they watched, the way their tone shifted when they didn't get the reaction they expected. People like that didn't usually stop at words. Not always. Sometimes silence made them angry. Sometimes calm made them feel challenged. He turned off the TV and lay back on the bed, hands behind his head. He had dealt with worse. But the next day didn't bring peace. When he woke up and stepped outside, the air was cool and still. The parking lot was nearly empty except for his truck and two other cars. But something caught his eye. There was a small piece of paper tucked under his windshield wiper. He walked over slowly and pulled it free. It was folded in half, no name on the outside. He opened it and read the words written in black marker. "We're not done." No signature, nothing else. He didn't flinch. He didn't frown. He just folded the paper, put it in his pocket, and looked around the lot. No one was in sight. This wasn't fear. This was preparation. He had lived through worse. Much worse. Still, it was clear now. These men weren't just passing through. They had made a choice. And it wasn't just about jokes at a diner anymore. He went back to the room, packed his things, and checked out. The woman at the front desk gave him a polite smile, but he could tell she noticed his serious expression. "You okay?" she asked. "Always," he said quietly. He got in his truck and drove off, taking a back route instead of the main road. He knew how to stay ahead of things. He knew how to disappear if he had to. but part of him didn't want to run. Not from people like that. Not anymore. About 30 miles down the road, he stopped at a gas station to fill up. As he was pumping fuel, a car pulled in a few pumps away. He recognized it instantly. It was the same SUV from the diner, different town, same men. One of them stepped out of the passenger side. It was the young one, the same guy who had come over at the auto shop. The man didn't move, just finished fueling, capped the tank, and closed the door. "You again?" the kid said, not loudly, but with a smirk. The man turned his head just slightly, looked him in the eyes. "No words, you know," the kid continued. "You made us look pretty stupid back the..." Still, the man didn't respond. "You think you're better than us?" "Nothing. You think just 'cause you're big and quiet, you're tough?" The man finally spoke, his voice calm, firm. "You done talking?" The kid blinked. "What? You done talking?" The man repeated. The kid hesitated, then took a step back, suddenly unsure of himself. From the SUV, one of the others called out, "Let's go." The kid looked back, then at the man again. "We'll see you around," he said. The man just nodded once. Not as a threat, not as a warning. Just a fact. They drove off, and this time the man watched them go without looking away. Later that afternoon, he pulled into a truck stop cafe to grab a coffee and rest. The place was nearly empty. A few truckers, a waitress, and a cook behind the counter. He sat at the far end, sipped his coffee, and kept his back to the wall, not out of fear, out of habit. The waitress smiled politely as she filled his cup. She looked like she'd seen a lot of people pass through. Maybe she could tell he wasn't just another guy passing through. "You look like someone who knows how to stay out of trouble," she said. He gave a quiet laugh. "I try." "Well, in places like this, that's a skill." He nodded. "People think trouble comes loud, but it doesn't always." She nodded back like she understood more than she said. He left a good tip, stood, and walked out to the parking lot just as the sun began to set again. The world was quiet and the road ahead was long, but he had a feeling it was leading somewhere he couldn't avoid. Those 4 men weren't going to give up, but they had no idea who they were messing with. Not yet, and when they found out, it wouldn't be the way they expected. The sun was low, touching the edge of the sky with soft gold. The wind had picked up a little. The road ahead was quiet. Only a few cars passed now and then, their engines fading into the distance. The man sat behind the wheel of his truck, both hands resting on the steering wheel. He wasn't in a rush. His mind wasn't on the next delivery or the time or even the road. It was somewhere else. It was thinking about choices, about people, about how sometimes trouble doesn't knock loud. It just follows you quietly until it thinks you're alone. But he wasn't afraid. He had learned a long time ago that fear doesn't help you. What helps is being ready, being calm, and knowing who you are, even when others try to forget who you are. He drove until it was almost dark, and then turned off onto a smaller road. There was a little town nearby where he could rest, maybe get a warm meal, the kind of place where people still nodded at each other in the street. He found a small diner near the edge of town, tucked between a grocery store and an old barber shop. The diner had an old sign that buzzed faintly in the wind. The windows glowed soft yellow, welcoming, steady. He parked and walked inside. It was quiet, just a few locals sipping coffee and talking in low voices. The waitress gave him a polite nod, and he found a booth near the window. He ordered a simple dinner, chicken, mashed potatoes, and greens. Nothing fancy, just something warm. As he ate, he let his shoulders relax. The road had been long, and the day had been heavier than most, but it didn't last. Halfway through the meal, he saw headlights flash through the window. A vehicle pulled into the lot. His eyes shifted just slightly, but he didn't stop eating. Then the bell above the diner door rang. 2 of the men from the group at the first diner walked in. Same jackets, same looks. They scanned the room and locked eyes with him. He didn't flinch. They walked toward the counter, talking to each other in low voices. But their eyes kept glancing toward his booth. He noticed, but he didn't react. He cut his food. He chewed slowly. His mind didn't race. He'd been in tighter spots than this. After a few minutes, one of them came over, stood at the edge of the table. "No hard feelings," the man said, almost casually. The man looked up. "Calm. No feelings at all," he replied. The other man gave a small smirk, as if unsure what to say next. "You've got that calm thing going," he said. "That military calm, huh?" The man didn't answer, but his eyes said enough. "You're not from around here," the guy added. "Nope." "You travel a lot?" "Enough." The man at the table took another bite of food. The guy standing there shifted his weight, trying to read him. "Just so you know, not everybody around here is as friendly as that waitress." The man gave a small nod. "That's all right. I didn't come for company." After a moment, the man walked back to the counter. The man in the booth finished his food slowly. He paid with cash, left a good tip, and stepped outside into the cool air. The night was quiet, too quiet. He walked toward his truck, but something made him stop. He wasn't alone. Out of the shadows, the rest of the group stepped forward, all four now. One of them leaned against the SUV parked nearby, arms crossed. The youngest one, the one who had first spoken to him at the auto shop, stood a little ahead of the others. "You don't look surprised," he said. "I'm not," the man answered. The kid tilted his head. "You think you're better than us?" "No." "Then why you walk around like you got nothing to worry about?" The man shrugged. "Because I don't." That answer hit harder than any insult would have. One of the others stepped forward. "What's your deal, man? You some kind of ex-cop?" "No." "Military?" The man paused for a second, then nodded. "Marine," he said quietly. There it was. The truth. The kid's eyes narrowed. "Figures. Does that change anything?" The man asked. They didn't answer. He took a step forward now, not in threat, but in quiet strength. "I didn't come here looking for trouble," he said. "Still not looking for it, but I won't back down from it either." The tallest one let out a short laugh, unsure. "You think you can take all four of us?" "I don't need to take anyone," he said. "But I won't let anyone take from me either. Not respect, not space, not peace." There was silence. The wind pushed gently through the lot. A sign squeaked above the diner. The kid looked at him again, really looked. Something behind his eyes changed. It wasn't fear. It was confusion. Maybe even something like shame. "You could have said something back at the diner," he muttered. "I did," the man said. "I said it without yelling, without pushing. You just didn't know how to hear it." The group looked at each other. The moment hung in the air, thick, quiet, uncomfortable. The man stepped past them and opened his truck door. Before he climbed in, he turned and spoke again. "You don't need to prove anything to me," he said, "but you should think about what you're trying to prove to yourselves." He got in the truck, closed the door, and started the engine. The SUV didn't follow. The men didn't speak. They stood there, still as the night around them. Not quite sure what had just happened, but knowing it wasn't what they expected. The man drove off, back onto the road, headlights cutting through the dark. Inside the truck, he let out a slow breath. It wasn't a win. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a lesson forced onto anyone. It was just truth. Simple, steady, unshaken. And sometimes that's enough. The road stretched ahead, long and quiet. The night had settled in now, stars blinking in the wide sky. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that doesn't need words. Just the hum of the tires, the steady breathing of the engine, and the thoughts of a man who had seen enough to know what really matters. He didn't feel angry. He didn't feel proud. He just felt still. The town faded in the rearview mirror, along with the diner and the group of men who had been chasing something they didn't understand. What they were really looking for wasn't a fight. Not deep down. They were searching for control, for meaning, for some way to feel important in a world that kept changing around them. And maybe, just maybe, they had found a moment that made them stop and think. Not because he raised his voice, not because he threw a punch, but because he didn't. That was the part they weren't ready for, strength that didn't need to be loud. He kept driving through the night until he reached a small truck stop at the edge of another town. It was late and the lot was nearly empty. He pulled in and parked under a flickering light. Inside the shop there was an older man behind the counter reading a book. A few racks of snacks, a cooler with drinks. He grabbed a bottle of water and a granola bar and paid quietly. The clerk looked up and nodded. "You headed far?" "Not too far," the man replied. "Be safe. Lot of strange folks out lately." The man gave a small nod. "Always are." Back outside, he leaned against the hood of his truck and looked up at the sky. The stars were bright here, brighter than in the cities where the lights drowned them out. He liked places like this, Simple places. Honest. As he stood there, the quiet settled around him like an old blanket. He remembered nights like this from years ago, back when he was stationed overseas, back when the air carried the weight of tension all the time, back when silence could mean danger or survival. But this silence was different. This silence was earned. He didn't talk much about his past because he didn't need to. People often expect stories with noise, loud moments, wild action, something that makes their heart race. But the real stories, the ones that stay with you, are often quieter than people think. It's the way someone holds themselves, the way someone chooses to walk away when they could have stayed and fought, the way someone doesn't let disrespect pull them into chaos. He had spent years learning to do that. It wasn't easy. There had been a time, a younger version of himself, who might have answered back at that diner, who might have stood up and let his anger speak louder than his discipline, but that version of himself had been through fire, had learned that not every battle is worth fighting the same way. And sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is simply stay standing. He sat in the cab of the truck and leaned his head back. His eyes closed, but he wasn't asleep. He was resting the way people do when they've carried something for a long time. His mind drifted, not just to the events of the last few days, but to the years before. The people he'd served with, the friends he'd lost, the promises he'd made to himself when he got out of the service. One of those promises was to never become the kind of man who let bitterness take root in his heart. He'd seen too many strong people turn cold because of pain. He refused to be one of them. That's why he chose peace when others pushed for conflict. That's why he drove away, instead of chasing those boys down. That's why he let his silence speak louder than his hands. The next morning, he woke with the sun rising over the hills. He stretched his arms, rolled his shoulders, and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The truck stop was still quiet. Just a few new cars in the lot, a trucker getting coffee, a woman walking her dog. He nodded to them politely. They nodded back. He wasn't famous. No one knew what had happened the night before. No one knew that he had stood face to face with 4 men who had underestimated him, and he didn't need them to. That was the beauty of it. What mattered wasn't the attention. What mattered was the truth of who he was. He got back in his truck and turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, smooth and steady. He checked the mirrors, looked out at the road, and pulled out onto the highway. A few hours later, he stopped in a small town where he was scheduled to drop off his next delivery. It was a little hardware store on Main Street, the kind where the owner still knew most of the customers by name. He parked out back, rolled up the door, and helped unload the boxes. The store owner shook his hand. "You're always on time," he said. "I try to be. You ever think of staying put?" the owner asked. "We could use a man like you around here." The man smiled politely. "Appreciate it, but the road suits me for now." "Well, if you ever change your mind, you've got a spot here." "Good to know." He got back into his truck and drove to a nearby park. It wasn't big, but it had a bench under a large oak tree. He sat there for a while, just watching the world go by. People walking their dogs, kids riding bikes, a couple sitting on a blanket in the grass. It reminded him of the good parts of the world, the parts worth protecting, the parts that don't need to be shouted about, they just need to be lived. Later that day, as he was heading out, he stopped to fill up his tank. While he stood there, he noticed a car pulling in at the other pump. The kid from the group, the youngest one, stepped out. He looked over, surprised but not scared. The man nodded at him once, and the kid walked over slowly. "I wasn't expecting to see you again," the kid said. "Neither was I." There was a pause. "I don't know what we were doing," the kid said, "back at the diner. The other night. I guess we thought we were proving something." The man stayed quiet. I wanted to say I get it now. "You weren't trying to start anything. You were just living your life," the man nodded. "Everyone's got their own path," he said. "Some people just don't know where theirs leads yet." The kid looked down at his shoes. "I think I need to figure mine out." "You've got time," the man said. Another pause. "Were you really a Marine?" the kid asked. "Yes," the kid gave a slow nod. "You carry yourself different. Makes sense now." The man finished fueling, tightened the gas cap, and opened his door. Before he climbed in, he looked at the kid again. You don't have to be like the people around you, he said. You can choose better. Every day you get that choice. The kid nodded again. Thanks. The man drove off, leaving the gas station behind, but this time with a small sense of closure. Not because he changed the kid's life, but because maybe, just maybe, he helped him see a new direction. And that's the thing about strength. It doesn't always lift weights or break walls. Sometimes, it just opens a door for someone else. He drove on. The road quiet, the sky wide open above, no crowd, no spotlight, just a man, his truck, and the steady rhythm of the road ahead. And that was more than enough. The highway stretched on under the morning sky. Light clouds moved slowly above, and the world seemed quieter than usual. The man's truck rolled steadily down the road, the same road he had traveled many times before, but this time things felt different. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't chasing time or running from anything. He was just driving, and sometimes that was enough. He had learned long ago that peace doesn't always come from silence. Sometimes peace comes from knowing you didn't let the world change who you are, no matter what it throws your way. Over the past few days, he had seen how quickly people could judge someone based on what they think they see, but he had also seen something else, something better, change. Not the kind that comes with big speeches or loud headlines, but small change, quiet moments when a person begins to see things a little differently. That was worth more than anything. He stopped in a small town just before noon. It was one of those places with only one stoplight, an old post office, and a diner that smelled like fresh biscuits. He parked near a park with a few benches and some trees that offered just enough shade. He sat down, stretched his legs, and watched the people walk by. An older woman was walking her dog. A man pushed a stroller while sipping coffee. Two teenagers passed by on bikes, laughing. It was all so normal, so ordinary, and that's what made it beautiful. He sat for a while, enjoying the calm. After everything that had happened, he didn't feel anger. He didn't feel bitterness. He felt grounded. That was the thing about carrying yourself with quiet strength. You didn't need to win arguments or prove your worth to strangers. You just needed to keep walking your path steady and true. As he was about to stand and head toward the diner for lunch, someone approached. A familiar voice, "Hey." He turned and saw the same young man from before, the one who had shown up at the gas station. The youngest of the group. He didn't look the same this time. He looked more settled, less sharp around the edges. The man nodded. "Didn't expect to see you again." "I was hoping I would," the kid said. "I've been thinking a lot since that night." The man didn't reply right away. He waited, giving the kid room to speak. "I used to think being tough meant being loud," the kid said, pushing people around, making them feel small so I could feel big. The man nodded slightly. "A lot of people confuse fear with respect." "Yeah," the kid said, lowering his eyes. "But the way you handled things, it stuck with me. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't fight. You just stood there, calm, like nothing could shake you." "It's not about not being shaken," the man said quietly. "It's about knowing who you are even when things try to pull you out of character." The kid looked at him like those words were hitting somewhere deep. "I've been thinking about changing, about doing better," the kid said, "but I don't know where to start." The man leaned back a little on the bench. "You start by showing up," he said. "By choosing the right thing, even when it's not the easy thing." The kid nodded. "I've got a long way to go." "Most of us do," the man said. "The road doesn't end. You just keep walking." There was a silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful, like something real was taking root. The kid took a deep breath. "The others, they're not ready yet, but I'm done following people who only lead with hate." "That's your choice," the man said. "And it's a good one." The kid looked at him again, and this time there was something new in his eyes. Gratitude. "Thanks," he said. "You don't owe me anything," the man replied. "Just live better." "That's thanks enough." The kid nodded one last time, then walked away down the street slower than before, but with more direction in his step. The man watched him go, not because he wanted praise or recognition, but because it reminded him that people can change. Sometimes it just takes someone showing them how. He stood up and walked to the diner. Inside, the smell of warm food and fresh coffee wrapped around him. He took a seat in the corner, ordered a sandwich and a coffee, and sat back as the low hum of conversation filled the room. There were no stares this time. No whispers. Just people eating, talking, and living. And that was enough. He finished his meal, left a generous tip, and stepped back out into the sunlight. His truck waited quietly across the street. As he walked toward it, he paused for a moment, looking around the small town, feeling the rhythm of it. It reminded him of something he'd forgotten, something important. No matter how far he traveled, or how much he had seen, there were still places in the world where peace lived, where kindness still had a voice, where strangers could meet, talk, and walk away a little better than before. He climbed into the truck, started the engine, and rolled out of town. The road welcomed him like an old friend. He passed open fields, tall trees and long fences that marked the edges of quiet farms. At a gas station a few miles down the road, he stopped to stretch his legs. As he walked inside to grab a bottle of water, the cashier, a young woman with kind eyes, looked up and smiled. "Nice day out," she said. "It is," he replied. "Safe travels." "Thank you." It was simple, but it mattered. He got back into his truck, and before pulling out, he looked at the sky, blue and wide above him. It made him think of all the roads he had traveled. All the towns, all the faces, some kind, some cold, some confused, some angry, but all human. And in that thought he found a kind of peace because, no matter where he went, he carried his own calm with him, not the kind that came from silence, the kind that came from strength, from patience, from understanding who he was, and not letting anyone take that away. He drove on, the road open ahead, the past behind, and the present sitting gently with him. The story was never about the diner. It was about what happens when judgment meets grace, when loudness meets stillness, when ignorance meets dignity, and how, sometimes a man can change a room just by refusing to let it change him. The sun was low in the sky as the man pulled off the highway and onto a winding country road. Trees lined the sides, their leaves rustling softly in the afternoon breeze. The world felt different here, slower, quieter, a place where time didn't press hard against the skin. He liked that feeling. It reminded him there was more to life than rushing, more to living than just moving from one place to the next. He wasn't thinking about the past much anymore. The incident at the diner, the way those men had tried to intimidate him, it was behind him now, a shadow that faded a little with each mile. What mattered was what came next. Driving through the little towns and fields, he felt a strange sense of calm growing inside. Like the road itself was healing parts of him he hadn't realized were still sore. Sometimes he thought the best way to fix things was to keep moving forward but not to run, just to walk steadily. He stopped at a small cafe tucked away in a quiet town. The kind of place where regulars greeted each other like family and strangers were welcomed with a smile. He pushed open the door, and the smell of coffee and baked goods wrapped around him like a warm blanket. The bell above the door jingled softly. Inside, the cafe was simple but cozy. Wooden tables, a few plants on the windowsill, and the low murmur of conversation mixed with soft music playing from an old radio behind the counter. A woman behind the register looked up and gave a friendly nod. "Welcome," she said simply. He smiled back and took a seat near the window, watching the light play on the leaves outside. The woman came over with a menu, and he ordered a cup of black coffee and a slice of pie. As he waited, he noticed an older man sitting alone at a table across the room. The man had a gentle face marked by years, but his eyes were sharp and alert. They caught each other's gaze for a moment, and the older man gave a small nod. After a while, the man who had been driving decided to say hello. He walked over and sat down across from the older man. "Nice day," he said. The older man nodded. "It is, best kind of day." They talked for a while. The kind of talk that isn't rushed. About the weather, about small-town life, about the simple things people don't always notice but matter a lot. The older man shared stories about the town, about the people who lived there, about how things had changed over the years. The man listened quietly, feeling the weight and warmth of those stories. At one point, the older man leaned in a little. "You look like someone who's seen more than just the open road." The man smiled. "Maybe a bit. Been through some storms?" He thought about it. Not just storms on the road, but storms inside himself. "Yes," he said softly. "More than a few." The older man nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Sometimes the hardest journeys are the ones inside us. But the road always leads somewhere. And sometimes it leads us right back to where we belong. The man looked out the window. The trees swayed gently. A bird sang softly in the distance. I'm learning that, he said, that it's not always about the destination. It's about how you carry yourself along the way. The older man smiled warmly. That's wisdom. They sat in companionable silence for a moment. Then the man finished his coffee and pie, thanked the older man, and stood up to leave. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors of orange and pink. He climbed back into his truck, feeling lighter somehow. Not because the road was easier, but because he was beginning to see the road in a new way. He started the engine and headed out again. The miles passed quietly beneath his tires. Sometimes he thought about the men at the diner, about the youngest one who had seemed ready to change, about how even small moments could shift a person's path. He realized that his own path was still unfolding, just like everyone else's. There were no easy answers, no simple fixes. Just a long road with many turns and crossroads, but he was ready for it. Because he knew now that strength wasn't just about standing up to others. It was about standing up for yourself, about holding on to what mattered inside you, even when the world tried to push you down. The road was long. The journey was slow, but every step forward was a step toward peace, and for him that was enough. The morning light crept slowly through the curtains of a small motel room. The man woke with a quiet stretch and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of the day ahead. There was no rush, just the steady rhythm of life moving forward. He had stayed in this town overnight, a place he found by chance after driving through the night. It was a town that didn't make noise about itself, but carried the kind of calm he needed. After a simple breakfast at a nearby cafe, eggs, toast and black coffee, he stepped outside and breathed in the cool morning air. The sun was just beginning to warm the streets and the town was waking slowly. He walked down the main street, noticing the little things that made this place different. The friendly waves of shopkeepers opening their doors, the sound of children's laughter drifting from a nearby playground, the soft hum of a lawnmower in a yard full of blooming flowers. As he moved along, a woman stopped him. She was older, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She looked like someone who had spent years in this town watching it grow and change. "You're not from around here," she said, her voice soft but curious. "No," he replied, "just passing through." "Well, you're welcome here," she said. "It's not a big place, but we look out for each other." He nodded, grateful for the kindness. It reminded him that no matter where he went, there were still good people. People who cared. They talked for a moment longer. The woman told him about the history of the town, the old buildings, the community events. She spoke with pride, but also with a quiet understanding of the challenges the town had faced. He listened, feeling the connection grow. There was something healing about these small moments, about meeting someone willing to share a piece of their world. Later, he found himself at a local park. The trees were tall and green, the grass soft underfoot. Families gathered for picnics, couples walked hand in hand, and joggers passed by with steady pace. He sat on a bench watching the scene unfold. It was simple, but it felt honest. The kind of peace that wasn't flashy or loud, but deep and lasting. As he sat there, he thought about his own journey. How far he had come, not just in miles, but in understanding. The men at the diner, their anger and ignorance had been a test. But what mattered was what he chose to do afterward, how he chose to carry himself. He remembered the youngest of those men, the one who had seemed ready to change. He hoped that kid would find a better path away from the shadows of hate and fear, because change wasn't easy. It took courage, it took patience, and sometimes it took the quiet example of someone who refused to give in. The man's phone buzzed softly in his pocket. A message from a friend, checking in after hearing about the diner incident. He typed back a short reply, grateful for the concern but wanting to keep moving forward. He stood up, stretched, and began walking again, this time with no particular destination in mind. The road was still long, the world was still full of challenges, but he felt stronger now, not because of what he had faced, but because of what he had chosen, to keep moving, to keep living with dignity, to keep showing up, no matter what. As the sun climbed higher, he walked toward the edge of town, the sky bright and wide above him, and in that moment, he knew the journey was far from over, but that was okay. because every step he took was a step towards something better. And sometimes, that's all we really need. The man sat quietly on the bench outside a small community center. The afternoon sun was warm but gentle, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Around him, the hum of life continued, children's laughter from a nearby playground, neighbors greeting each other, and the faint sound of music from inside the building. He wasn't in a hurry. He hadn't been for some time now. After everything that had happened, rushing seemed pointless. Life was about moments like this, simple, still, and real. Inside the community center, people were gathering for a meeting. It was about something important, about coming together, about listening, and about change. The man watched as folks entered the building, some with hope in their eyes, others with worry. He recognized the faces of people who cared deeply about their town and about each other. He remembered the fight at the diner, the anger and fear. But he also remembered what came after, the quiet strength he carried and the chance it gave others to rethink their own paths. He decided to step inside. Maybe there was something here for him too. The room was bright and filled with chairs arranged in a circle. A group of people sat waiting, talking softly among themselves. The air was thick with anticipation. A woman at the front smiled warmly and invited everyone to take a seat. The man found a place near the back and sat down. He listened as people shared stories of struggle and hope, of mistakes and forgiveness, of fear and courage. One by one, they spoke about what it meant to live in a community where differences sometimes divided more than united. They talked about the need to listen to one another, to see beyond the surface and to find common ground. When it was his turn, the man spoke simply but with feeling. He told them about his journey, the moments of pain and confusion, the times he had been judged unfairly, and the strength he found in standing calm and steady. He spoke about the incident at the diner, not to blame, but to show how hate could be met with understanding. He told them about the young man who had started to question his own beliefs, and how even small acts of kindness could spark change. The room was quiet. His words were not loud or fiery, but they carried weight. When he finished, a young woman in the front stood up. "Thank you," she said softly. "Your story reminds us that change starts with each of us. That peace isn't just the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding." Others nodded, some wiping tears, others smiling. The man felt something shift inside him, a sense of belonging. He wasn't just a traveler anymore. He was part of something bigger. After the meeting, people came up to him, shaking his hand, sharing their own stories, thanking him for his courage. He realized that strength wasn't just about facing conflict alone. It was about opening doors, building bridges, and trusting that people could grow. As the evening grew darker, the community center emptied slowly. The man stepped outside into the cool night air, stars twinkling above. He looked up and took a deep breath. The road ahead was still long. But he wasn't walking it alone, and that made all the difference.